My father fired me from the company I built myself just so my brother could become a CEO because he was born to lead. Months later, their empire collapsed. They begged me to save everything, and I made sure to get them to sign the company back for me before even considering crossing the threshold again. Hey, Red, my family thought I would spend my whole life working like a slave to build their empire, while my golden brother was getting all the credit. So I said, screw that. I decided to build something of my own and left, but they weren't finished yet. With me, let me go back to the beginning. My name is Oscar Cross. I'm 35 years old, and for over a decade, I was the operations director at CrossTech. On paper, I managed one of the fastest growing artificial intelligence infrastructure companies in North America. In practice, I was the one who built everything. Every system, every patent, every big deal. A client I won over from the start already had my brand. Cross was born from an idea of my father, Martin Cross, now 62. Years ago, back in 2008, in a cramped two-room office. He had vision, but I didn't know how to execute it. I took care of that. I transformed a family business who lived off small contracts at a giant valued at $2.5 billion, reliable enough to close deals, with defense agencies, Fortune 500 companies, and municipal governments. My younger brother, Luther, is 3 years younger than me and my complete opposite. I am the engineer, the architect, the guy who understands the inner workings of everything we create. Luther is stylish, elegant, photogenic, and superficial to the core. He spends more time with her, more time spent at charity balls and in front of cameras than ever before in a development meeting. He never contributed anything to the systems that made CrossTech successful, but even so, my father, I adore it. For years, I believed that results would speak louder than charm. I thought that when Martin finally retires, it would be obvious to put in charge the person who actually built the technological foundation of the company. That illusion shattered on a sunny Thursday in May. The CrossTech Global Investor Summit is the biggest event on our calendar. Every major event, clients, investors, and media outlets attend. We use the event to introduce new projects and announce the next steps. I had spent weeks preparing my keynote address, a live demonstration of a new artificial intelligence optimization system, the revolutionary project we were developing. I was backstage reviewing the latest notes when Martin came up to stage. As expected, he began with his usual speech about the growth of Cross, global expansion, the future of AI-based infrastructure. But then his tone changed. He paused, adjusted the microphone, and let out a phrase that would change everything. As CrossTech enters its new era, I am proud to announce that my son Luther Cross will assume the role of CEO starting next quarter. For a moment, I thought I'd heard wrong. The audience erupted in applause, flashes going off everywhere. Luther entered the stage in a tailored blue suit, smiling like Dharma, who just won the lottery. My name was only mentioned at the end when Martin called me the technical foundation of past successes. I'm less like that and more as a consolation prize. Even so, I forced a smile and my presentation went as planned. The demo worked perfectly, but nobody cared. The headlines that night weren't about technology or our future contracts. They were about Luther, the new CEO, CrossTech's visionary, complete with glamorous photos and analyses of how his strategic leadership would shape the next decade of the company. The following morning, the damage was already visible. Luther called his first executive meeting as CEO-elect. I didn't go. Consulted about the agenda. He announced a strategic realignment, which in practice, this meant reorganizing senior leadership. Several department heads who had worked with me for years ago were replaced by people loyal to him, mostly friends from the faculty of administration or contacts. He's a public relations professional with no technical background. He canceled 3 engineering projects ongoing, saying they were too niche, and redirected the budget to marketing campaigns. Our project of the more ambitious PID, a scalable autonomous infrastructure system, was paused indefinitely so that Luther could focus on market visibility. I confronted him privately after the meeting. He dismissed me he gave a fake smile and said, "You're brilliant with the technical aspects, Oscar, but the future, it's not built in server rooms, it's built in meeting rooms and in the headlines. Leave it to me." My father hasn't answered my calls all week. When I finally managed to catch him in the office, he repeated the same speech he's been hearing his whole life, that leadership is about vision, not competence. Luther has what you don't have, he said. He inspires people. Maybe he believed it, or maybe
he just wanted to see his favorite son in charge before he retired. In any case, the message was clear. My 12 years building this company from scratch meant nothing compared to my brother's charisma. One night, Mason. He and I were still in my office, long after everyone had left. It was with me from the beginning, back in the days when we programmed at folding tables and ate cold food for dinner. Midnight. Before working at Crosstech, Mason had headed operations at a startup, a logistics company that grew from 5 branches to 50 without missing a single delivery deadline. He identified bottlenecks. Operational, like other people reading facial expressions. "They're going to sink this company," he said. He was dry. I didn't answer, but deep down I knew he was right. And because, for the first time since I joined Crosstech, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be there when it happened. For a week, I tried to convince myself that the storm would pass, but it didn't. It passed. What bothered me wasn't their ambition. It was the fact that perhaps they were right about me. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. They wanted my work, not my leadership. And this realization, more than any other, that thing would define everything that would follow. 3 months after the announcement of, with Luther as the future CEO, Crosstech no longer seemed like the same company I had invested my whole life in. Adult. From one moment to the next, priorities changed. Reliable engineering gave way to appearances. Success. Projects were renamed and revamped to please investors and not to meet technical standards. Prices were artificially reduced to impress the press, not because the systems were ready. The first major crisis came from a project we called Atlas, a system of AI-powered infrastructure control designed for large-scale logistics networks. It was ambitious, complex, and far from ready to be launched. I had made it clear to Luther that releasing it too early would be catastrophic. He ignored me. "We need a big one. The result will be in the next quarterly report," he said. "You are cautious. Too much." The Atlas was put into operation 6 weeks ahead of schedule. In over several days, 2 customer networks collapsed, disrupting transportation operations. Tens of thousands of containers. Emergency teams worked day and night. Nighttime efforts to contain the disaster. Instead of taking responsibility, Luther called an emergency meeting. He spoke with the entire company and blamed my division for technical management failures. His speech was rehearsed, smooth, calculated. "Our vision is correct," he said, in front of hundreds of employees. The problem was in the execution. And behind the scenes, clients were furious. 2 major contracts were suspended. While the investigations were underway, the engineering team worked tirelessly to fix the systems and restore functionality. I refused to let them take the blame, but Luther's narrative had already taken hold. Scattered. In meetings, he spoke of me as if I were a relic, a technical genius who didn't understand the direction the market was taking. Martin repeated the same speech. He said I was essential, but too rigid. Attention reached its peak at the meeting. Following the advice, I was prepared. I brought failure reports, warnings of quality control, and evidence that Luther had ignored engineering approval signatures. As soon as the meeting started, I made everything clear. Atlas failed because it was launched before it's ready, he said. Our own documentation shows warnings. repeatedly ignored. If this continues, we're going to lose more than just contracts. We're going to lose our credibility. Luther wasn't shaken. He leaned back. He sat down and smiled. The prospect of an Oscar is valuable, but we can't stay in that position. Paralyzed by fear. The sector is evolving rapidly and he's not keeping up. He turned to the board. We need leadership that understands that speed. It matters as much as precision. My father cleared his throat and added, I agree with Luther. Innovation isn't about playing it safe. Oscar, you're invaluable in this area. Technical skills are important, but leadership requires vision. We need you to focus where you need to be. It's really good. The message was crystal clear. I was being let go. On the other hand, the council voted to limit my authority to operations only. Day by day, all strategic decisions would now require Luther's approval. I left that meeting with no power to stop what was to come. In the following weeks, everything worsened. Luther restructured the engineering department was dismantled without consulting me. Entire teams were reassigned to new managers. Budgets that I had approved were frozen or diverted to marketing, but the worst was yet to come. Suddenly, an internal audit emerged, something that Martem assured was from routine. It wasn't. The auditors were asking specific questions about Atlas, about budget overruns, missed deadlines, management failures, all things that were either beyond my control or
were caused directly by Luther's interference. At first, I thought it was just incompetence, administrative, until seeing the preliminary report. He stated that the flaws in the projects were the result of operational negligence on my part or on the part of my department. It was my responsibility. The language was carefully crafted to portray me as incompetent. 2 weeks later, Mason showed up at my office with the final report in hand. They're building a case, he said. He said, they're going to fire you. I didn't want to believe it, but he was right. In the end, in August, the council scheduled an extraordinary session under the pretext of discussing leadership issues. Operational. When I entered the conference room, the atmosphere was cold and rehearsed. Cameras and press teams waited outside. Martin and Luther were seated, side by side on top of the table. The public relations team had already briefed them. Allied reporters under embargo, timed with the voting. Martin, it began with a rehearsed education. Oscar, we recognize everything you've done by the company, but recent operational failures have tarnished our reputation. The board concluded that leadership changes are necessary. I maintained a firm voice. These things happened because the projects were launched without proper authorization. I have all the documentation. Luther interrupted me before I finished. Documentation doesn't change the results. Customers are dissatisfied. Deadlines have been missed. We need accountability. The council voted, and it wasn't even close to balanced. My dismissal was classified as for just cause, a legal maneuver that deprived me of the right to the severance package, stock options, and retirement benefits. A security team entered the room before I could even collect my notes. As they escorted me out of the building, photographers' flashes illuminated the lobby. News alerts, the messages were popping up on my phone even before I got to the parking lot. Crosstech fires veteran CO after failures. Operational. The narrative was already written, and it was cruel. Outside, Mason was waiting for me with a cardboard box in his hands, containing my personal belongings. It's over for me too, he said. If they think this company can function without you, they're completely wrong. Crazy. In the following days, the devastating domino effect. Customers called to express concern, but none offered real support. Longtime colleagues began to avoid me completely, fearing being associated with someone labeled as incompetent. It became clear that the campaign to defame Luther was working. My reputation, previously built on results and reliability, were now tarnished by an alleged public failure. But beneath the humiliation and, from the anger, there was one certainty. I had spent 12 years transforming Crosstech. He was an industry leader and knew that technology better than anyone. Alive. Deep down, I knew. They hadn't seen the last of me yet. The weeks after my dismissal were a freefall. The headlines dried up my downfall in brutal detail. Industry analysts called me outdated, difficult, and unsuitable for leadership. In panels, experts speculated that I had sabotaged Cross's future out of ego. Luther fueled the fire every time. Interview. Oscar is a great coach, he told one network. But leadership requires vision. Some people simply weren't born for it. The message was clear. It was over. When the phone finally rang, it wasn't a job offer. It was my father. It doesn't shame the family, he said. No press, no public statements. Remember who gave you everything. He hung up before I could reply. A few hours later, Luther sent my own message. Don't bite the hand that fed you. The calls that used to fill my inboxes were accessed. Interested companies canceled interviews. Clients I had brought to Cross myself refused meetings. Even former colleagues avoided me, some because of loyalty to Luther, others out of fear. The reach of the Cross was long, and it will become radioactive. The only one who refused to disappear was Mason. He kept showing up at my apartment. Almost every day. Coffee in one hand and strategy plans in the other. You don't, it's over, he always said. You're just free. It took him a while to say those words, to make sense. But when they did, we started talking about we had something to talk about, not what we had lost. There were days when I would open a notebook and close it again. Starting over wasn't courage, it was terror. But keeping it small, just to make them comfortable, seemed even worse. We spent hours reviewing my early work, the patents I had registered even before CrossExister. They were 100% mine and formed the backbone of the company's current systems. Crosscast had licensed, but that contract would expire in 18 months. Without renewal, all the infrastructure, their situation would be legally compromised. It wasn't revenge, it was leverage. The decision to create something new didn't come from a moment of anger, but from a simple question. What if we do it another way? How? We knew that if I launched a company with my name, CrossTech,
It would be crushed before it was even born. So we built in the shadows. At the beginning of September, we gave it a name, Helix Systems. On paper, the company belonged to the holding company was registered abroad. My name didn't appear anywhere. Officially, I was just a technical consultant. Employee participation, it was issued at the operational level, while the holding company masked the true owners until the time of disclosure. Mandatory. Mason handled the operations. Elena Vos, a venture capitalist he harbored an old grudge against Martine, who provided the initial capital. Years before, Martine had excluded her fund from CrossTech's Round B. After she refused to accept an abusive term and, even though she used her diligence to sell the idea to another investor, Lena doesn't forget about debts. We contacted some engineers who had left the company after Luther's rise to power. All of them. They accepted immediately. The team was small, but the people were great, who understood the technology at its core and were eager to prove a point. Rumors quickly began to circulate about a mysterious new startup developing next-generation infrastructure artificial intelligence. I didn't know who was behind it. Analysts speculated it was a foreign sovereign wealth fund. Others thought a private equity group was positioning itself for an acquisition. Luther publicly mocked them. Helix is just a glorified consulting firm trying to appear bigger than itself. That is. 2 weeks later, my father called again. If you're involved with this Helix nonsense, he warned, get out now. Everything you know, all the skill you possess exists because of this family. Don't confuse what we've built with something you can copy. I remained silent. He hung up before I could respond. The big contract arrived sooner than expected. Nexus Freight, one of CrossTech's prominent clients, approached us discreetly. Nexus Freighter had lost millions in the Atlas system disaster struck, and they were desperate for a stable alternative. We presented them with a pilot solution, which surpassed anything Crosstech could offer at that time. 6 weeks later, the Helix, he signed a $50 million contract with add-ons. The announcement shook the industry. Nobody knew. Who were we? But suddenly that mysterious startup had a major client, and Crosstech had a public problem. The results spoke for themselves. The Helix platform reduced the costs of Nexus infrastructure, improved by 30%, and increased operational speed by 40%. Specialized magazines have praised the system as the most promising infrastructure innovation of the last decade. Even so, no one connected the dots back to me. The next connection of my father wasn't well-mannered at all. "If you're behind this," he growled, "he is stabbing his own family in the back." The next day, I received a letter from Luther's legal department is accusing me of competing against my own inheritance and threatening legal action. But it was pure bluff. On paper, I didn't own anything. We ignored it and moved on. Building. By the end of the quarter, Helix already had a growing customer base, cash flow, consistent revenue, and market analysts calling it the underdog challenging Crosstech. The family that thought they had erased me from the industry had no idea that I was already back and stronger than ever. Never. They still thought I was finished. That would be the first mistake. Their meteoric rise caught Crosstech by surprise. In the beginning, the board treated us with disdain, as if we were an unimportant undertaking. But when the results of Nexus Freight, they became public and 2 new contracts began circulating as rumors, Tom changed from arrogance to the hostility. The first attack came in the form of a lawsuit. Luther's legal department filed a 140-page complaint accusing Helix of stealing code, Crosstech's ownership, and trade secrets. Press releases they labeled it a clandestine operation built on stolen intellectual property. The media devoured the story, and the story went viral for days. But when the case reached court, the narrative, theirs, collapsed. Our documentation showed that all the core elements of our platform, they were patented years before the creation of Crosstech. And those patents were registered in my name. The judge denied the claim of legal ownership of that intellectual property, and, without any evidence of misconduct on the part of Helix, denied the request for an injunction. Months later, the case was completely dismissed. Crosstech stock never recovered. Trading volume tripled compared to the 30-day average, the price plummeted 14% the following week. Recordings of internal calls between investors leaked, leaving the board furious at the baseless legal charade. Even so, Luther doubled down. If you couldn't destroy me in court, he would try to do it in the public eye. Within a few days, anonymous reports.
They started appearing on the internet, warning about critical security flaws in Helix's infrastructure. Some industry blogs published without fact-checking. Several potential clients withdrew. Negotiations with us. It was obvious where the mudslinging was coming from. The reports used internal terms at Crosstech. We responded immediately. Mason hired an independent firm. Cybersecurity experts were tasked with conducting a full audit. The first phase, announced a few days ago, found no evidence, no critical vulnerabilities. A month later, the final report concluded that our protocols, the safety standards, exceeded industry standards. We published the preliminary summary immediately. When the final report is out and we're following it up with evidence that the rumors had been planted by a connected PR agency directly to Crosstech, the reaction was merciless. Several websites corrected their publications. Some even issued formal retractions. Crosstech's credibility suffered further. A scam, and the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, opened a discreet investigation into the competitive practices from the company. While they rushed to contain the fire, we sped up the expansion. RX closed 2 contracts with Fortune 500 companies, one in the sector of telecommunications and other energy infrastructure. Our technology not only matched that of Crosstech, was surpassing her. That's when the big opportunity arose, a $300 million federal contract, millions of dollars for defense infrastructure. It was the biggest deal of the year, and both companies were on the short list. Luther couldn't hide the frustration. At a technology conference, he publicly scoffed. Helix is just an anonymous startup trying to bite off more than it can chew. But behind the scenes, a hunt began to find out who was behind Helix. Later, internal documents leaked showing Martin calling us parasites and Luther labeling us as thieves living off our legacy. Their desperation has escalated. Agents of Crosstech attempted to bribe a junior analyst at Helix to gain access to our systems. We intercepted the attempt, recorded every communication, and handed everything over to federal authorities. The result? A formal investigation into Crosstech's corporate conduct and new restrictions on its proposals. Governmental. Even with him struggling, the Helix continued to rise. Our proposal for the defense plan was more robust, innovative, and secure. At the end of October, we received approval. Conditional, pending only security clearance. In practice, a victory. But the game was not yet over. It was over. By noon, the news was already on all the trading desks at Stock Market. 2 brokerage reports called it a regime change. The headlines read, "Helix defeats Crosstech in mega government contract." Analysts began openly speculating whether Crosstech's dominance was finally coming to an end. The victory caused panic within the board. Internal memos leaked showing executives blaming the Luther's leadership over the losses. Investors demanded an emergency meeting. The pressure mounted until it reached a point where no one could ignore it. The government's security protocols, they demanded that Helix disclose its ownership structure before the contract was formalized. We were expecting this. Me and Iran agreed to comply with the requirement. Knowing exactly what would happen next, the leak occurred within a few hours. Oscar Cross, founder and controlling shareholder of Helix Systems. The industry exploded. The headlines dominated all media outlets. This CEO, who was fired from Cross, secretly builds a rival startup and orchestrates a historic turnaround in the sector. The story moved out of the technology niche and dominated newspapers and business programs. Talk shows replayed segments in which Luther had scorned the Helix, now interspersed with our successive victories. In less than 24 hours, 3 of Crosstech's 10 largest clients suspended their renewals. On Tuesday, the value of the shares plummeted 27%. Shareholders demanded changes in leadership, calling Luther an amateur who didn't see the threat. My father, under pressure, he was forced to release an official statement, calling the revelation a betrayal of family trust, which only it served to increase public sympathy for me. Within Crosstech, the council, the meeting took place twice in 3 days. Executives began sending in resumes for competitors. Analysts were talking about a hostile takeover. Insiders called it the most humiliating turnaround in corporate tech history. And I remained silent. I let the headlines speak for me. The revelation dominated the news for 48 hours straight. Crosstech's investor support line collapsed due to the high volume of calls. When the weekend news cycle ended, my face was on every business channel. My father was the first to call. His voice trembled with anger. "You humiliated this family?" He spat on everything we built. He thinks the name Crosstech doesn't mean nothing? I remained silent. He filled the silence with more venom. "You are a traitor, Oscar. You'll regret this." He hung up before I could answer. Luther, he chose another path. He called a press conference. Cameras flashed. As he leaned over the microphones, with the same confident smile of someone who still believed that charm could hide weakness. "Oscar didn't build the Helix," he declared. "He stole it. All the success that Helix claims to have comes from Crosstech's intellectual property. He's trying to usurp the family legacy for himself, but Crosstech is bigger than a bitter man. The market didn't believe a word. 2 days later, after the press conference, on Thursday, shares fell another 19%. Meanwhile, Helix's private valuation, driven by interest from new investors, it almost doubled overnight. Their next move was legal. Luther's lawyers have opened 3 new lawsuits in different states, alleging breach of contract and theft of trade secrets. Mason called it a shotgun tactic. Lena called it desperation. Our legal team dismantled each and every one of them. In just a few weeks, they were all gone. The cases were dismissed for lack of evidence. Each defeat drained more money and credibility from Crosstech. But Luther wouldn't give up. He determined that HR should make aggressive offers to the engineers at Helix, offering double the current salaries in some cases. Some listened, none. He accepted. Our retention rate remained very high because Mason and I had. Helix was structured differently from the start. The employees did not receive. They were not just entitled to a salary. They had stock options, a real stake in the company's future, and they knew that's where they were. The environment was built on loyalty, not corporate politics. One night, Mason dropped a pile of resumes on my desk. "These weren't hunted down," he said. "They are volunteers, Crosstech engineers. They want to leave." At the end of the quarter, Helix had hired 50 former Crosstech employees. It wasn't just growth, it was drainage. The clients followed the same path. The defense contract opened doors, and in just a few months, we closed new deals with a major telecommunications company, 2 regional energy networks, and a giant in the financial sector. In all cases, Crosstech was a previous supplier, and in all of us, we won. The breaking point came at the end of the 4th quarter with Omnisa Communications, a multinational company with a billion-dollar contract and infrastructure. Luther had been fighting for its renewal since August. In November, our team submitted a competing proposal. We demonstrated to Eunice our advantages in cost, stability, and scalability. They listened. A week later, Crosstech lost the contract it had staked on to balance its finances. The collapse was immediate. Crosstech's market valuation fell below $1 billion for the first time in years. Investors began demanding. Luther's resignation was publicly announced. Analysts predicted bankruptcy in less than 12 months unless drastic measures were taken. But Luther did not give in. He doubled down. In personal attacks, calling me a parasite, feeding off the blood of my own family. In interviews, my father, older and visibly dejected, echoed the same sentiment, saying that I had abandoned my duty out of ego. The irony did not go unnoticed. 2 men who had destroyed my future were now begging the world to believe that I had stolen it from them. While Crosco was sinking, Helix was soaring. We opened new offices in Sao Paulo, Francisco, and Washington. Our team has grown to over 400 employees. The demand for our systems was so high that Lena had to turn down several investors who wanted to participate. The narrative had been reversed. Crosstech was dying. Helix was inevitable. But the victory wasn't just about contracts, it was about perception. And that realization hurt more at that moment than any financial loss. The final blow came when Crosstech's internal memo was leaked. The document detailed discussions of the advice regarding Luther's leadership was called reckless, unprepared, and the greatest risk to the company's survival. Within hours, the file spread through industry channels. Luther tried to say it was fake news. Nobody believed it. That same week, one of the main Crosstech's institutional shareholders have declared their support for a board restructuring. The pressure has increased. The final blow came from within the house itself. The regulatory investigation into the attempts to sabotage Crosstech uncovered evidence of bribery involving senior executives. Heavy fines, open to a compliance audit, and the lawsuits began to pile up. The grand strategy of Luther amidst lawsuits and smear campaigns had exploded in his lap. Even his closest allies, they abandoned it. Kroska went into public collapse. Clients were leaving en masse. Engineers, they were resigning in waves, and the company was bleeding in front of the entire market. Martin couldn't handle the pressure. He literally suffered a heart attack caused by stress, and
he needed to step aside. Luther continued as if, but the power was nothing more than a facade. Each week, the value of Crosstech fell while the dominance of Helix was growing stronger. By the end of the year, the score was undeniable. A Helix already controlled almost half of the contracts that previously belonged to Crosstech. Crosstech's valuation had, our stock plummeted 70%, and our projections indicated that we would become a unicorn in less than 6 months. That's when the whispers began. Perhaps the only way to saving Crosstech meant selling it. Some investors suggested a merger with Helix to save what remained. It was unthinkable for Luther, but for the first time was not unthinkable for the council. The war was not yet over, but for the first time since, my resignation made it clear who was winning. On a Tuesday morning, the reception sent me a message. Martin Cross and Luther Cross are here. They insist on seeing him. For a second, I considered having security cut off the building's lights, but I told them to wait, and I left the two of them sitting in the reception area for 40 minutes while I finished a meeting with investors. When I finally entered the conference room, they were standing. Martin looked older than me. He remembered, thinner, paler, the weight of the last year etched on his face. Luther, on the other hand, he still dressed as if nothing had happened, clinging to the illusion of control. "Oscar," it began. "Martin," his voice trembling. "We need to talk." I walked past them in silence, and I sat down at the head of the table. "You have 5 minutes," I said curtly. "Make it count." "The penalty." Martin began with a speech that he had clearly rehearsed. He spoke about family legacy, the empire started by our grandfather. He said that Crosstech was in our blood, and I was still part of that legacy. Luther, he leaned forward with a half smile of arrogance. "You're only where you are because of us," he said. "Without the Crosstech, you wouldn't amount to anything." I laughed, a short, cold laugh that made them both shrink. "Nothing," I repeated. "Without me, your company didn't even exist. The patents that underpin their systems are mine. The technologies that the clients I use are mine. And the contracts you're losing are also mine. Mine. You tried to erase me, and now you're here begging me to save you. Let that sink into your head for a moment." Luther's jaw clenched. "We are willing to discuss a partnership," he said. "A merger, 50-50. I leaned back in my chair without rushing. "You are a company weeks away from bankruptcy. Your customers are fleeing, your investors are disappearing, and their shares are worth pennies. You are not in a position to negotiate. You are not my equals. They are prisoners." Martin seemed to have swallowed the glass. "Please," he murmured. "I built the Crosstech out of nowhere. I don't want to see it die." "If you still care about this family," I interrupted. "When you took everything that I built it, that was family. When they called me incompetent in public, that was family. When they called me a traitor on national television, that was family. Don't pretend now that blood erased the betrayal." Silence filled the room. Mart looked at the floor. Luther, he tried one last trick. Anger. "You think you won? That destroying us? It makes you powerful? You're still my brother, and this is still our company. You owe us this." I stood up slowly, walking until I was just inches from his face. I owe you nothing," she said in a low voice. "You took everything from me, and they expected me to crawl back, but I didn't crawl. I built something better." I put a folder on the table and slid it over to them. "Here's what's going to happen. Option A, Cross merges with Helix. I assume 80% control. I'll reorganize the board of directors and restructure everything. You'll only keep symbolic positions. Option B, you refuse, and I'll let the company bleed to death. Bankruptcy in 6 months. Your name disappears from the market, and the clock of licenses, my patents still show 11 months remaining. Operating on them after that will be illegal. These are the only options you'll have." Martin's hands trembled as he spoke. He opened the folder. Luther didn't even touch it. "That's humiliating," he spat. "No," I replied. "That's accountability. Humiliation is what you did with me. This is me offering you the chance to go out with something instead of nothing." They argued, of course, and threatened new lawsuits. They hinted at resorting to regulatory bodies and even tried to appeal to my conscience. None of that mattered. Each attempt to regain control only made them seem smaller. When the threats turned into pleas, I knew they were finished. 2 days later, the Crosstech board held an emergency meeting. With revenue plummeting, shareholder lawsuits, and an imminent delisting from the stock exchange, the decision was unanimous. Cross would be merged with Relic Systems. The company, what I had built in the shadows, I now swallowed the same thing that had expelled me. The news dominated all the business headlines. Analysts called it the most uneven merger in tech history. Employees celebrated. Investors returned in droves, and in less than a week the name began to appear on the building facades. The complete legal overhaul, now Helix Global, was completed in the following quarter. Before the merger was finalized, my father sent one last message. "I hope you're proud of yourself." I replied, "Yes, I am, for the first time." At the same time, I didn't feel like I was living in their shadow. They were the ones who were in it. Mine. The official merger took less than 60 days, but the transformation that followed was total. Crosstech no longer existed, at least not as anyone remembered it. The press called it an acquisition. Investors called it a rebirth. For me, it was justice, not revenge, not resentment, just the inevitable consequence. From arrogance, encountering reality. The first measure was a total restructuring. Entire departments were disassembled and rebuilt from scratch. Outdated systems were eliminated. Old and unprofitable projects were shut down within weeks. I didn't want that. To mend a sinking ship. He wanted to build something worthy of the future. Mason was officially appointed Director of Operations, the right place for the man who once climbed 50 distribution centers without missing a single deadline. Now he controlled the day-to-day operations with the same precision that had sustained our early startup days. Lena Vose has taken a seat on the new board. Her strategic mind has proven invaluable as we guided the aggressive expansion of Helix Global. Together, we created a leadership team who valued innovation above politics, performance above ego. A cultural shift was immediate. Meetings that were once filled with corporate vanity were transformed into real strategy sessions. Engineers who had been ignored under Luther's administration now had budget and freedom to create. Projects that had been stifled by bureaucracy were reactivated and accelerated. Productivity skyrocketed, team morale soared, and clients who having abandoned Crosstech, they began to return on their own. For Martin and Luther, the new order was a bitter pill to swallow. After months away on medical leave, Martin announced his retirement days before the merger was finalized. Everyone knew the board had forced to do so. He published a carefully written note about seeking new challenges and disappeared from public life.
Luther, on the other hand, refused to disappear. He fought against restructuring in every step-by-step. He demanded meetings, questioned decisions, and made a scene when necessary. Ignored, until I gave him something he couldn't argue with, a new position, brand ambassador, without the power to, a decision made without a seat on the board, with no influence whatsoever on operations. He will become a mascot displayed at conferences and fairs, smiling for cameras and reading scripts written by other people. He tried to resign, but the merger clauses bound him. His capital was frozen, and leaving would mean losing millions. So he was left humiliated, powerless, and irrelevant. The irony was delicious. The man who once told the world I was just a technician was now the public face of a company he didn't know. He was in control. The man who called me replaceable was now the one being replaced. Industry magazines called the case the most poetic corporate downfall of the decade. The growth of Helix Global, it was explosive. In 6 months after the merger, we doubled our customer base and acquired 3 new government contracts. Our market share exceeded 60%, and analysts predicted that we would dominate the artificial intelligence infrastructure sector for the next 10 years. The company that tried to destroy me was now the beating heart of an empire that I controlled. The media loved the story. Every major news outlet wanted an interview. I turned down almost all of them, but I ended up accepting one during prime time with Business World Weekly. The interviewer, he asked all the expected questions about strategy, leadership, and technology. But then he leaned forward and asked what really mattered. "Does all this seem like revenge to you?" I paused for a moment before answering. "They tried to erase me from my own legacy," I said. "Now, I own theirs." The phrase made headlines the next day, and this time no one dared disagree. It wasn't anger, it was a fact. Every decision, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, it had all led me to that moment. A future in which my name would no longer be whispered behind closed doors, nor hidden in the footnotes of reports. Now it was on the facades of buildings, in boardrooms, in contracts worth billions. But it wasn't just about winning. It was about rewriting history, my history. The betrayal that should have destroyed me ended up becoming the foundation of everything I built. The humiliation that,
what should have ended my career, became the catalyst for something much bigger. 6 months later, I was in front of the windows of the new Helix Global headquarters. A glass spiderweb dominated the horizon of the city. Down below, the streets bustled with the activity of a company that already. It was no longer defined by the past. It was no longer cross-tech. It was no longer a business. A family driven by inheritance and ego. It was something sharper, more intelligent, more strong, built on merit, vision, and relentless execution. Mason entered the room holding a final report. "We are above projections again," he said. 3 new clients closed deals this week. One of them is Unisa's biggest competitor. I agreed, still gazing at the horizon. "Great, keep going." "Do you still think about them sometimes?" he asked Martin Luther. "Sometimes." I admitted it, but not angrily. They made their choices and I made mine. When he left, I turned back to the view. 12 years ago, I had entered cross-country, believing I would spend my life building someone else's dream. They underestimated me, betrayed me. They discarded it, and now every part of their legacy, every system, every client, the dollar belonged to me. The empire that once rejected me was now mine. Restructured, reborn, unstoppable. The name above the horizon was no longer Crosstech. It was Helix Global. And by the first time, he was exactly where he should be, under my name, under my leadership, under my control. The betrayal did not end my story. She only wrote the first chapter of something much bigger. And this time, no, there was no one else in my way. Comment, Reddit of the day. Call it what you will. They want it. Revenge, justice, destiny. But in the end, the guy who was expelled for being just a technician became the name engraved on the buildings that destroyed them. The family wanted an empire, and he built one, but with his own last name on top.